Hey there, it's Adam speaking tonight. I'm glad you're here with me again. You know, nights like this always feel a little softer when I imagine someone out there listening, maybe with a cup of coffee in hand, maybe just lying back after a long day. It makes me feel like we're sharing the same quiet space together. I've been thinking, how often do we sit down in a restaurant, hear the clatter of plates, the hum of voices, the quick shuffle of shoes on the floor, and never really stop to notice the people moving around us? The servers smile, they nod, they ask if everything is all right, and we smile back, maybe say thank you, and then turn back to our own lives. But here's the thing, a smile in a restaurant doesn't always mean joy. Sometimes it hides exhaustion. Sometimes it hides a story that no one at the table ever asks to hear. And yet, those stories, they're real, and they carry so much weight. Tonight, I want to share one of those stories with you. Not just numbers on a paycheck, not just a schedule pinned to the wall, but a letter written by a woman who came to America with hope in her hands, chasing what we call the dream. She found herself behind the bright lights of a dining room, wearing that same smile you and I have seen 100 times, but carrying so much more inside. So, settle in, listen closely, because this letter, it's more than words. It's a window into the silence behind the smile. Well, I'm sitting here at a small kitchen table. The kind with one shaky leg, the kind that wobbles if I lean too hard. The overhead light hums with a faint buzzing sound, throwing a pale yellow glow across the paper in front of me. My hand moves slowly, the pen scratching against the page. There's the smell of fried onions lingering from dinner, clinging to my clothes, my hair. It mixes with the faint scent of detergent drifting in from the hallway, a reminder of how small this apartment really is. I still remember the first day I stepped off the bus in this country. The sky was wide open, bluer than anything I had ever known. My suitcase was scratched, one corner taped together, and inside it I carried more hope than clothes. The wheels rattled over cracks in the pavement, echoing in my ears as I walked toward the unknown. People hurried past me, tall buildings casting long shadows, horns blaring from cars that never seemed to stop. The rhythm of English words surrounded me, fast and sharp, sounds that slipped through my grasp when I tried to repeat them. And I thought to myself, this is it. This is where everything changes. I believed the stories I had heard. The promise that if I worked hard, if I smiled, if I just kept going, I could build a better life. Looking back, I wonder, was it really hope that carried me so far? Or was it just the fear of staying trapped in the life I left behind? Listen, the first job I ever landed was at a small restaurant, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The neon sign flickered at night, buzzing like an insect, painting the sidewalk in pink and blue. A bell above the door rang with a tired little jingle every time someone came in. Inside, the air smelled of grease and strong coffee. Plate clattered, silverware scraped, and the radio in the kitchen played a country song I didn't know the words to. The manager handed me an apron, stiff with starch, and pointed toward the tables. I can still feel the rough fabric against my hands, the knot pulling tight at my waist. My English was broken, my smile too wide, maybe too eager. Customers looked at me with curious eyes, some kind, others impatient. One man tapped his finger on the menu, sharp and fast, as if I should understand instantly. Another sighed loudly, waving me away before I could even answer. In that moment I told myself it was only the beginning, that every long hour, every stumble over words, every forced smile would lead me closer to something brighter. I clung to that thought like it was the only thing keeping me upright, because maybe it was. So, those early mornings came fast. I would step out while the sky was still grey, the streets damp with dew, and the air smelling faintly of diesel from buses already on their routes. My shoes slapped against the sidewalk, and I carried that apron folded in my bag as if it was some kind of uniform that promised a future. Inside the restaurant, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a cold white glare against the shiny tables. The kitchen steamed with the smell of bacon and coffee grounds burning on the hot plate. I remember the hiss of oil when the cook dropped in a basket of fries, the smoke curling toward the ceiling fans that never spun quite fast enough. My hands shook as I balanced trays, my voice trembling when I asked customers what they wanted. Some ignored me, their eyes still on their phones. Others answered too quickly, their words running past me like water over stone. But I kept reminding myself this was the path forward. Every stumble, every flush of embarrassment, every aching step was just the cost of getting closer to the life I imagined. And yet, even then, I felt a shadow rising in me. The question of how much of myself I would have to trade away just to belong. You know, there was this one night that stays with me. The place was packed, music from the jukebox spilling over the chatter of voices. The air was thick with the smell of grilled meat and spilled beer soaking into the floorboards. My arms ached from carrying plates stacked too high, the sweat sticking my shirt to my back. At one table, a group of men laughed loudly, their voices sharp, bouncing off the walls. One of them whistled as I passed, another snapped his fingers at me like I was a dog. Their laughter followed me back to the kitchen, echoing louder in my ears than the clatter of dishes. I can still hear the scrape of the chair on the tile when one leaned back too far, blocking my way, forcing me to smile and say, "Excuse me," with a voice that shook more than I wanted it to. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the sound of their laughter still in my head. And I thought, maybe this dream of mine was never about respect. Maybe it was only about survival, and survival always demands a price. So, I remember sitting on the edge of that narrow bed after my very first week. The room smelled of detergent from the laundromat downstairs, mixed with the faint odor of fried food that clung to my hair and skin. The blinds rattled softly when a bus roared past and a slice of neon from the pawn shop blinked across the wall, red and tired. I counted my tips slowly, laying each crumpled bill flat on the blanket. A handful of singles and coins and one precious $5 bill that felt heavier than gold. My hands smelled faintly of grease and soap, and I could still hear the ringing of a kitchen bell in my ears. It was not much, barely enough for rent, a little left to send home, but I folded the money carefully, slid part of it into an envelope and smoothed the flap like it was a promise. That night I held on to hope the way some people hold on to prayer. I told myself this was just the beginning, that every shift, every sore muscle, every stumble over English would build into something brighter. I believed the small sacrifices were leading somewhere, and maybe that belief was the only thing that kept me steady in a city that didn't even know my name. Listen, the weeks stretched and the days grew longer. The alarm rang at 4:30, the room still dark, the air damp with the smell of rain through the cracked window. My shoes slapped against wet pavement as I hurried toward the restaurant, apron folded under my arm. Inside, the manager barely looked up. "Double shift today," he said flatly, pen scratching across a clipboard. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, cold and unforgiving, the tickets printed endlessly, curling across the counter like paper snakes. My hands burned from hot plates. The hiss of the fryer stung my ears, and the sharp scent of burnt toast drifted through the kitchen. At one table, a woman snapped her fingers at me, red nails flashing under the lights. She spoke slowly, too loudly, as if I were deaf or a child. At another, a man sighed, rolling his eyes when I stumbled over his order. The laughter from his table was sharper than the clatter of silverware, cutting deeper than I wanted to admit. And still, I nodded, smiled, whispered, "I'm sorry," more times than I can count. Each hour stretched like a rope pulling tighter around my chest. I told myself it was only temporary, but deep down I started to wonder if this was the real price of chasing a dream, giving pieces of myself away while the world never even noticed. Well, my body began to carry the restaurant even when I wasn't there. My shoulders throbbed long after I'd set the trays down. My feet burned at night, the skin raw from standing 12 hours in the same pair of shoes. Even when I lay on a thin mattress, the smell of grease clung to me. Oil, onions, a sour tang of spilled beer that never washed out completely. The kitchen was a storm of sound, the clang of pots, the sizzle of meat hitting the grill, the shrill ring of the service bell, each one crashing against the other. The hood fan roared like a restless engine, yet still the air was thick, smoky, heavy. I wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand, the taste of salt stinging my lips. And in those hours I thought of the stories I'd heard before I came here, how America was paved with opportunity, how work would bring dignity. But sometimes, dignity doesn't survive 12 hours on your feet. Sometimes it gets buried under the noise, the smells, the endless tickets printing from a machine that never runs out of paper. And I wondered, was I becoming invisible to myself too? You know, the hardest moments weren't always the work itself, but the way people looked at me. The manager barked orders like I was another piece of equipment, table 4 now, without even meeting my eyes. Once, when I asked for a short break, he laughed, the sound sharp as glass, and said, "Breaks are for people who can keep up." Customers had their own way of reminding me I didn't belong. Some pretended not to hear me. Others exaggerated their words as if mocking my accent would somehow make me understand better. A group at the corner booth once spoke about me as though I couldn't possibly follow. She probably doesn't even have papers. Their laughter was louder than the jukebox spilling across the room. I smiled anyway, because smiling was survival. I kept moving, kept serving, kept lowering my voice so no one would hear the crack in it. Truth is, in that moment, I felt less like a person and more like a shadow, something useful only when it stayed quiet and out of the way. Maybe the strangest part was how quickly exhaustion became normal. I woke before dawn, the sky still ink black, the apartment cold enough that my breath left faint clouds. The floor creaked beneath my steps and the window rattled when the early bus rolled past. I pulled on the same shoes, the soles already thin, and the apron stiff with last night's soap. At the restaurant, the rhythm never slowed. The ticket machine rattled, spitting paper like a relentless reminder that no matter how much we served, there was always more. The smell of coffee grounds and scorched bacon clung to the air, layered on top of bleach and sweat. I carried plates until my hands trembled, balancing dishes like glass towers. The sound of laughter from customers mixed with the crash of dishes behind me, and I felt caught between two worlds, one that feasted, one that served. And when payday came, the envelope felt insultingly light. Crumpled bills, coins that jingled louder than they were worth. I stared at the numbers on the stub, so many hours, so little left. Still, I folded it neatly as if respect could be earned through order. After all, maybe dignity wasn't in the money, but in the fact I hadn't given up yet. God. There was a night I nearly collapsed by the sink. My legs felt like lead, every muscle twitching from the weight of trays carried back and forth. The stainless steel gleamed under harsh light, and the faucet dripped in an endless rhythm, echoing in the hollow of the kitchen. The smell of bleach burned my nose as I scrubbed pans long after the last customer left. The manager walked by, his shoes clicking against the tile, and muttered, "Faster." That one word sank heavier than the bucket in my hands. Faster, when my knuckles were raw, when the water scalded my skin, when the clock above the exit already said midnight. I bit back the urge to cry because tears had no place here. The sound of laughter drifted in from the parking lot as the waitstaff who finished earlier left together. Their voices rose into the night while I stayed bent over the sink. In that moment I realized something. The dream I carried wasn't made of fireworks or open skies. It was built on hours nobody else wanted. I was trading pieces of myself for a future I still couldn't see. And yet, I whispered to the empty kitchen that I would keep going, because quitting would mean admitting I had crossed oceans for nothing. So, after a while, I stopped expecting anyone to see me. The dining room glowed with warm lights, silverware chiming against plates, conversations rising and falling like waves. To the guests, I was just another pair of hands carrying food, my voice blurred into the background, my smile folded neatly into the scenery. There was one evening, I can still picture it, when I stood by table 7 holding a pitcher of water. The glass was cool against my fingers, condensation dripping onto my skin. The family seated there laughed loudly, the father gesturing with his fork, the mother shaking her head as if the joke was too much. I waited for a pause, a chance to speak, but none came. I poured in silence, my presence barely registering. The little girl didn't even look up. She reached for the bread basket without glancing at the hand that served her. And it struck me. Was I becoming invisible, or had I always been? Maybe the uniform itself was a kind of eraser, smoothing out everything personal, leaving only the function behind. Truth is, being unseen cuts deeper than insults, because it makes you question whether you exist at all. Listen, the manager treated me much the same way. His office smelled of stale coffee and paperwork, the blinds half closed, dust motes spinning in the thin strip of sunlight. He didn't say my name, he said, her, or the girl. Once, when a customer complained about cold soup, he tossed the bowl onto the counter and barked, "Fix it." His voice was flat, like a hammer hitting wood. I remember standing in the kitchen, steam curling from the pot, the ladle heavy in my hand. Around me, the clatter of pans filled the air, cooks shouting over the roar of the hood fan. My chest tightened as I thought, not about the soup, but about how easily I had become just a tool, passed from one set of hands to another, blamed for whatever went wrong. And maybe that's the cruelest part. Not the shouting, not the long hours, not even the aching body. It's the way a person can strip you down to a single role, server, cleaner, fixer, until the rest of you fades like smoke above the stove. After all, once they stop saying your name, it's easy for them to forget you were ever a person at all. You know, there was this night when the restaurant was buzzing, every table filled, the air thick with the smell of garlic bread and fried chicken. Laughter rose and clashed with the clatter of plates, the jukebox playing a song that fought to be heard. I moved quickly, weaving between chairs, balancing trays heavy enough to bend my wrists. At one point I dropped a fork, just a fork, and it clinked against the tile. No one looked at me. The noise swallowed the sound as if it had never happened. I bent to pick it up, my knees aching, and in that crouch I caught sight of myself in the reflection of the soda machine, apron-stained, hair damp, eyes dulled. For a second, I barely recognized the woman staring back. That's when I realized, invisibility isn't always about being ignored. Sometimes it's about being seen only as part of the background, a moving shadow that holds no story. And in that reflection, I ask myself quietly, if no one here remembers me tomorrow, does it mean I was ever really here tonight? Maybe the hardest blow came from the words I overheard. A customer at the counter whispered to her friend, loud enough for me to catch, "They're all the same, just replaceable faces." Her perfume hung in the air, sweet and sharp, mixing with the bitter scent of burnt coffee. She laughed softly, stirring sugar into her cup, never once looking at me. I carried her plate anyway, the ceramic warm against my palms, and set it gently in front of her. She didn't meet my eyes, just kept talking as if I were part of the furniture. My chest tightened, and for a moment the chatter of the room faded, replaced by the hollow ticking of the clock above the register. And I thought, this is what it means to be invisible. Not to vanish, but to exist so fully in someone's presence and still be unseen. After all, when a person reduces you to nothing, it's not the body they erase, it's the dignity you tried so hard to hold on to. After all, there were nights when I walked home under the buzzing streetlights, their glow pale and uneven across the cracked sidewalk. The smell of fried grease clung so deep to my skin that even the cool night air couldn't waft it off. Passing cars splashed puddles onto my shoes, and the sound of tires on wet pavement echoed louder than my own footsteps. In those moments, I realized how invisible I had become. People passed me on the street without a glance, just as they did inside the restaurant. The envelope of pay in my bag was thin, and the ache in my back was thick. But what weighed heaviest was the silence. No one knowing my name, no one asking if I was all right. I sometimes whispered my own name into the night air, just to remind myself it still belonged to me. And yet, the more I said it, the more fragile it felt, as if the city itself could erase me with every step. Truth is, invisibility doesn't come all at once. It arrives slowly with each ignored glance, each careless word, until one day you can't tell if you are serving people or simply fading into the walls around them. Well, dreams have a way of slipping when you don't have the strength to hold them. I thought coming here would mean more time for my family, more chances for them to smile because of me. Instead, the hours stretched until there was nothing left to give. I missed birthdays. Calls went unanswered because my shifts never ended on time. My mother's voice on the phone grew thinner each week, the static on the line blending with the hum of the restaurant's refrigerator in the background. The body doesn't lie. My wrists swelled, my knees stiffened, my breath came short after carrying trays too heavy. The smell of bleach from late-night cleanup stung my eyes, and the roar of the hood fan followed me even into sleep. I would dream of standing still, yet still feel the weight pressing down as if the trays were welded to my hands, and slowly the vision of a better life began to crumble. The bright picture I carried in my pocket, my family smiling in the sun, felt further away each day. Sometimes I wondered if chasing this dream meant losing the very people I wanted to protect. Maybe the dream wasn't slipping, maybe it was breaking, piece by piece, in the very place I thought would keep it alive. Sometimes the body gives warnings long before the mind accepts the truth. I remember standing at the sink, water rushing, plates stacked high, when suddenly the room tilted. The fluorescent light above flickered, the hum of the refrigerator stretched into a hollow echo, and for a second, the world spun away. My knees trembled, hands slipping against the slick surface of a dish, still smelling of onions and sauce. The cook barked something, his voice drowned out by the hiss of the fryer. I steadied myself against the counter, the metal cold and unforgiving under my palms. The scent of bleach was sharp, almost metallic, and my throat tightened as I struggled to catch my breath. Nobody noticed. Or maybe they noticed and chose to look away. I was just another moving piece of the machine, and machines aren't supposed to falter. Later, lying on the mattress in my apartment, I pressed my wrist against my forehead, skin hot, body trembling. The ceiling crack above me seemed to split wider, as if mocking me. And I thought, if I broke, who would care, who would see? The dream I carried had no room for weakness. But truth is, even the strongest dream cannot stand inside a body that's falling apart. You know, sometimes the hurt came not from the work but from the words. My accent rolled too heavy for some ears. A man at table 3 laughed openly when I asked him to repeat his order. "Can't you speak English right?" he said, his friends chuckling around him. The sound of their laughter stuck sharper than the fork I was holding. Another night, a woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, not softly enough, "Why do they even hire people like her?" Her perfume was sweet, cloying, and it turned my stomach as I set down her plate. The jukebox in the corner played a love song, but all I could hear was the hollow sting of her words. In those moments, I felt the color of my skin before I felt my own heartbeat. I became aware of every difference, my voice, my face, the way I carried myself, and I realized how quickly people can strip away your humanity with a single sentence. After all, it wasn't just my English they doubted, it was my right to stand there at all. I still remember. One afternoon, when the sun outside was blazing, the restaurant felt colder than ever. The air conditioner rattled, dripping faintly into a bucket by the door, but the dining room was alive with chatter. My hands ached from carrying pitchers of water, and the damp cloth of my apron clung to my waist. At the far corner, a group of men debated loudly about politics. One of them looked at me when I set down their plates, his eyes sharp, and muttered, "Go back where you came from." The words dropped like stones. The smell of sizzling meat rose from the grill behind me, but all I could smell in that moment was humiliation, hot and sour. I smiled anyway, because that's what survival demanded. I walked away, the sound of their laughter sticking to my back like grease that no soap could wash off. And inside I asked myself, how many more pieces of myself would I have to trade just to keep standing here? Truth is, by then the dream I carried had already cracked. I once imagined bringing my family here, showing them bright streets, safe homes, full tables. Instead, I found myself missing calls, too tired to even hold the phone. My mother's voice on the line grew faint, filled with pauses, as if the distance between us wasn't miles, but entire worlds. The restaurant had stolen not only my time, but my health, my sense of worth. The roar of the hood fan echoed in my ears, even in sleep. The scent of bleach burned my nose long after I'd scrubbed the last pan. My body sagged under the weight of hours no one else wanted. My soul sagged under the knowledge that to most people, I was not a dreamer, not a daughter, not even a woman with a name. I was just the server, the girl with the accent, the one who smiled because she had to, and maybe. That's the cruelest truth. The American dream didn't vanish all at once. It eroded, shift by shift, smile by smile, until nothing remained but silence behind the face I showed the world. The body can only carry so much before it gives way. One evening the rush was heavier than usual. The bell above the kitchen rang over and over, plates stacked high, the air thick with smoke from the grill. I remember carrying a tray that felt too heavy, the smell of onions stinging my eyes, the roar of voices blurring into one long hum. Then suddenly, the floor tilted. My knees buckled, the tray slipped, plates shattering across the tile with a sharp crack. The noise was swallowed instantly by silence. Customers staring, forks paused mid-air. My breath caught in my throat, the room spinning with the acrid scent of grease and broken ceramic dust. The manager's voice cut through sharp and cold. "Clean it up!" No hand reached out, no pause of concern. I crouched down, fingers trembling as I picked up jagged edges, a thin line of blood rising across my palm. And in that moment I understood. Collapse here wasn't tragedy. It was inconvenience. To them, I wasn't a person who had fallen. I was just the mess she left behind. You know, after that night I walked home slower than ever. The streetlights flickered above, one buzzing like a tired insect. My palm stung, wrapped in a paper napkin that still smelled faintly of coffee. The city air was damp, filled with exhaust fumes and the faint sweetness of bakery bread, cooling somewhere far down the block. At my apartment, I dropped onto the mattress, too tired to even untie my shoes. The walls pressed close and the crack in the ceiling stretched like a scar. I listened to the radiator hiss, to footsteps in the hallway, to the silence that filled every corner. My body felt heavy, but heavier still was the realization that here in this place I could break apart and no one would notice. And I thought, maybe that's what it means to give everything to a dream. Not to chase glory, but to pour yourself into the floor of a kitchen, into the clatter of dishes, into hours that eat your life, until the only proof you were there is a stain on an apron and a scar on your hand. Sometimes, survival slips through your hands no matter how tightly you try to hold it. I remember the night I came back to the apartment, carrying a small bag of groceries, rice, beans, a loaf of bread. The hallway smelled faintly of damp carpet and bleach, the flickering bulb overhead buzzing like it was about to burn out. When I reached my door, there it was, an envelope taped crookedly above the knob. Inside, a notice. Past due, final warning. My chest tightened, the paper crinkling in my shaking hands. I could hear the muffled sound of a TV from the neighbor's unit, a laugh track spilling into the hall. So ordinary, so cruel in its contrast. The smell of my own groceries rose sharp and sour as the paper blurred in my vision. That night, I sat on the mattress, the envelope beside me, the crack in the ceiling staring down like an accusation. I whispered promises to myself. Next paycheck it will be fine. Next paycheck I'll catch up. But deep down I knew the math never added up. Hope was shrinking, and walls I had counted on were starting to push me out. Listen, the day came faster than I wanted. I walked up the stairs, breathless from another double shift, apron still smelling of grease, and found my things in a pile outside the door, a black trash bag tied tight, my clothes stuffed inside, shoes resting on top like abandoned markers of a life that no longer fit here. The landlord's voice was flat, unmoved. "Late is late," he said, keys jangling as he turned away. I stood there, the hallway echoing with the distant bark of a dog, the hum of pipes running through the walls, the smell of disinfectant mixed with dust, sharp in my nose as I bent to gather what was left of me. Carrying those bags down the stairs, I felt the weight of every choice pressing against my shoulders. On the street, the neon lights of the pawn shop blinked like they always did, pink and blue across the cracked pavement. Only this time, I wasn't walking toward home. I was walking with no place left to go. And the truth is, nothing makes you feel smaller than realizing even the roof over your head can disappear while the world keeps moving, like you were never there. After all, at night I found myself sitting on a cold bench at the bus stop, my bags at my feet, the city pressing in around me. The street smelled of gasoline and wet asphalt, the drizzle soaking into my sleeves. A neon sign from a liquor store blinked in the distance, buzzing faintly like a tired heartbeat. People walked by, umbrellas bobbing, their voices carrying fragments of laughter I couldn't hold on to. I hugged my bag tight, the zipper broken, a sock peeking through. My body was trembling, not just from the damp air, but from the weight of being nowhere. The rumble of buses came and went, their brakes hissing, doors opening and closing, but I stayed still. I'm able to step onto any of them. For the first time, I wondered if maybe the dream had already left without me, and I was just chasing its shadow. And yet, as I sat there, I whispered to myself in Spanish, soft words my mother used to say when nights grew too heavy back home. The sound of my own language wrapped around me like a thin blanket, fragile but familiar. Maybe it didn't change the night, but it kept me from disappearing entirely into it. The next morning, after hours of wandering, I went back to the restaurant because I had nowhere else to go. My eyes were swollen, clothes wrinkled, the scent of damp pavement clinging to me. I kept my head down, afraid someone would notice. And then something unexpected happened. A man at table 5, grey hair, kind eyes, looked up when I poured his coffee. He didn't complain, didn't snap his fingers. Instead, he said quietly, "Thank you. I know you're working hard." His words were simple, almost nothing, but they landed in me like sunlight breaking through clouds. The sound of his voice cut through the usual clatter, the forks against plates, the hiss of the fryer, and for the first time in weeks, I felt seen. That night when I finally lay down on a borrowed couch at a co-worker's place, I held on to those words. Just 2 sentences. But they reminded me that even in a place built on noise and shadows, there could still be moments of gentleness. And sometimes, gentleness is enough to keep you standing one more day. Maybe the kindness that matters most is the kind that comes quietly. One afternoon, during the lull between lunch and dinner, I sat on a crate in the back alley, the air heavy with the smell of old grease and trash bins lined against the wall. My stomach ached from skipping meals, my hands still trembling from carrying too many trays. Then one of the dishwashers, a young guy from Honduras, sat beside me. He didn't say much, just opened his lunchbox and slid half of his sandwich into my hands. The bread was warm, filled with beans and cheese, wrapped in foil that crinkled softly in the breeze. I remember the sound of a radio from a passing car, the distant beat of a song I half recognized. We ate in silence, the alley noisy with clattering dishes from inside. But for a moment the food tasted like home, and I realized survival isn't only about strength. Sometimes it's about someone placing a piece of bread in your hands when you have none. That half of a sandwich kept me going longer than any paycheck ever did. I still remember, one night after closing, the kitchen finally quiet, the smell of soap heavy in the air. The cook, a woman who had worked there longer than I had, hummed as softly as she scrubbed pans. Her voice was low, steady, carrying a melody from back home. I leaned against the counter, eyes burning from exhaustion, and for a moment, the song pulled me out of myself. She noticed me listening and smiled, just a small, tired curve of her lips. Then she started singing louder, and I found myself whispering the tune in Spanish, our voices blending awkwardly but real. The fluorescent light above buzzed, the mop water sloshed, but in that dim kitchen, music became a thread holding us both together. That night, when I walked out into the cool air, I carried that song with me. It echoed in my head over the roar of passing cars, over the hiss of the bus brakes, and I thought, maybe the world takes so much, but it still leaves small pieces of beauty. And those pieces are what remind us we're still human, even when everything else tries to erase us. Sometimes, hope arrives in places you least expect. One evening, the restaurant was nearly empty, the hum of the refrigerator louder than the voices in the dining room. I was wiping down a table near the window when I noticed a folded napkin left behind. Inside it was a note, written in hurried blue ink. Thank you for your kindness. People notice more than you think. Beside it lay a $10 bill, crisp and clean, out of place among the usual coins and crumpled singles. The handwriting was shaky, but the words burned steady into me. For a moment, the clatter of dishes faded, the smell of bleach softened, and I just held that note, feeling the paper rough against my fingertips. Someone had seen me, not just the tray in my hand or the smile on my face, but me. I slipped the note into my pocket, and later, lying on the borrowed couch, I read it again under the dim lamp. The city outside rattled with sirens and car horns, but that little piece of paper sang louder than all of it. It was proof, however small, that invisibility wasn't absolute, and sometimes one pair of eyes was enough to keep your heart from disappearing entirely. Well, this is where my letter must end, because behind every smile I've given across a restaurant table, there has been another story, this one silent until now. After the trays are stacked, after the chairs are turned upside down on the tables, after the neon signs outside buzz their last glow into the night, I carry home more than the smell of grease and soap. I carry the weight of hours, the sting of words, the ache of being unseen. And yet I also carry those small moments. The sandwich shared in the alley, the song hummed in a quiet kitchen, the note scribbled on a napkin. They remind me that even in a place that often strips away humanity, there are still fragments of kindness that keep it alive. So if you ever sit in a restaurant, laughing with friends, waiting for food, I hope you'll remember that the person behind the smile is more than a shadow. Behind the uniform, behind the accent, behind the weary hands, there is a whole world, tired, silent, but still dreaming of fairness. After all, I may be invisible to many, but I am here, and I still believe that one day justice will shine through even the dimmest light of a diner at midnight. Thank you for staying with me tonight. Sometimes the hardest stories to hear are the ones hidden in plain sight, the ones we walk past every day without noticing. This letter wasn't only about a woman serving food in a restaurant. It was about all the people who stand quietly in the corners of our lives, carrying burdens we never see. The smile that greets us, the hands that place a cup of coffee on the table, the voices that struggle with words we take for granted. Each one of them is a whole world filled with sacrifice, longing, and a dignity that deserves to be honored. What I take from her story is this: kindness costs nothing, but it can mean everything. A word of respect, a look that truly sees, a simple thank you. Small gestures like these can become the thread that keeps someone standing when life tries to erase them. So the next time you sit down at a table or meet a stranger's eyes, I hope you'll pause and remember. Behind every act of service there is a soul, and when we choose to see them, even for just a moment, the world becomes a little less lonely. Thank you truly for listening tonight. It means more than you know. I'll be here again with another story, another voice from the silence. Until then, take care of yourself and take care of one another. Good night.